Commercial property is one of those topics that people get confused about. They get scared. They get afraid. They stick to residential. They stay in their lane because they don't know what they don't know. This is one of those sessions where we unpacked some of those, how to maximize your returns in commercial property. It was more than that though. We spoke about the due diligence things you need to be considering to make sure you're protecting yourself, you're mitigating that risk. One of the things that got me really excited about this session was we spoke about how to spend $100,000 to increase your valuation by $300,000. We spoke to the step-by-step on how to consider and execute that type of strategy, along with some of the locations that are adding value in 2025 and right now. So this was an absolute cracking session with Michael Schafferius from Palise Property, and the man Steve Palise came along as well. We had even questions about insurance, like who pays for the insurance as well, and what that looks like, and the asset types that people need to consider. This is a wide-ranging commercial conversation where you can sort of understand how to maximize those returns. Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Miles, and together with Joe Tucker, we've created Australia's largest property Facebook group. We've over now 83,000 property investors, so buckle up and enjoy this conversation with Michael Schafferius with special guest co-host Steve Palise from Palise Property. Let's dive in.
The best way to sell an asset at a great price is to create competition around it. So What we like to do at Rain & Horn, they're a big auction office. People have different opinions about auctions. So auctions, it's a bad way to buy, typically, because it'll force you to put your best foot forward. But it's a great way to sell. And one of the big benefits of selling under auction conditions is you're buying an asset like as is, where is, that's it. Like there's no questions asked. If you are the winning bidder, you are buying it and you're settling in 30 days. That's it. So it's a great way to sell an asset if you can get the right price. But what I would do with our clients is I'd just run through a process and say, look, when you go to market, whether it's for auction, expression of interest with the closing date, or private treaty, what we're trying to do is just create competition and seeing if we can get a deal done on the best terms possible for you as a seller. And we just run through that process. And people are like, well, what happens if I don't sell at auction? It's like, well, auction's really, in commercial, auction is really just the first 5-6 weeks of the process when we go to market. So why don't we go to market? Let's take great photos. Let's advertise it correctly. Make sure the property's ready to go before we do that. And over that first 5-6 weeks, let's just get as much interest as we can, and then try and get as many people in the room as possible. And one or two things is going to happen. We're either going to sell quickly to someone that just doesn't want to run the risk of going to auction, and if that's the case, great. Second step is we go to auction and we bid it out and see where we end up. And if we end up at a price that you're happy with, you're great. We're sold. 30 days later, it's settled. No questions asked. And then if we end up passing in at auction, that's what people get really scared about. But that's just really, if you don't sell at auction, you just end up in an expression of interest situation where if we don't have unconditional buyers in the room, that's okay. We're probably going to have a handful of guys that are conditional that will need due diligence or finance or bits and pieces. And then at that point, we'll consider their offers, and then really if there's something odd happening and the property is just not, an interest to a lot of people, that's when you would end up at private treaty and on the market. But that would be rare. Like normally you're either selling cash unconditional to someone, or you're then taking a conditional offer from some very genuine buyer that just needs finance, and away you go, So we just walk through the process, decide on what they're more comfortable with. Often there'd be, someone would like one way more than the other. Often someone's had a really bad experience with auctions. So you talk through those objections and get a game plan together, and away you go. So
there we go. I just want to say,
I was going to say with commercial, most our Brisbane ones, and Queensland ones, you go under contract subject to due diligence.
Yeah.
So is auction just a way to get rid of that? And then if you are going to auction, you have to give much more information. I imagine you got to package up a bundle of here's all the details you need to make your bid if you want, obviously, an unconditional auction.
Yeah, well, the rules have just changed in Queensland massively. We're just working through that now. But previously, the way we would do it was we get an IM together and we get as much information as we could, because the more information you provide up front, the easier it is to sell unconditionally. But we try and get plans together, all your statutory outgoings, management fees, kind of as much as you could disclose as possible, just to say, look, this is what it's going to look like if you buy it. Leases, everything like that. You provide it all in the IM. Send that out to people, let them do their own due diligence in that 5-6 week period, and then if they like it enough, then they would come to the auction and make their bids.
But Mick, I want to know, so what were your views on office space in Brisbane? Because I suppose that's where you did a little bit around, and then take us through office space and then warehouse and then retail, because I think you had some very, I suppose, expert views on this.
I can't truly remember what we talked about, but it's so
I remember it, but yeah, I didn't record it, but I remember it. Yeah.
Office in Brisbane, yeah. Like, what's my views on that as a whole? Okay, cool. Yeah, so office in CBD, and this is true in other areas as well, is, I remember what I said now. Office in the CBD is a little bit like The Big Short. Everyone's doing massive incentives, and it's a big game of hot potato where they're trying to pass the asset on to someone else or a big managed fund, and they're trying to keep values really, really high. So as an example, if you got $1,000 a square meter on rent, sometimes there can be up to 40, 50% incentive in that. So the actual net figure you're actually getting on the lease, if you're the one cutting the deal as an owner, you're getting like $500 a square meter, but that keeps your rent high, which means it keeps your valuations high. And everyone's just hoping that, the demand will be there in the CBD. And to that point, it probably will be, but there's times it kind of ebbs and flows. Like, obviously COVID's a great example. Like, there was vacancy everywhere. It was a really hard time. People had to cut some pretty hefty deals to get tenants into their buildings. But what I've seen over the last 10 years too is that these guys that cut these deals, they're often, if you hold it long enough, it recovers, and they can work their way through it. So, probably a Big Short's a bit aggressive to say that, but there's definitely a game people are playing to keep their valuations high in the CBD, to keep everything floating well. And that's interesting because, when people talk about office gets a really bad rap, but because it gets tied into with that. But if you actually take office into like a suburban area, some of these small office areas, like in industrial areas or, a neighborhood center, those kind of things, they can be really good assets, and they're not the same as buying an office in the CBD. You'll still have incentives tied in with them, but they're nowhere near as aggressive. So, it gets a bit of a bad name. Office isn't going anywhere. People have, I think, learned now over the last couple of years that not everyone is really good at working from home. They need to get out of the house. They need to show up and actually see people and touch grass and actually go get outside. And so office isn't going anywhere. But actually some of the most successful investors that I've come across in Brisbane, they're making a play on office. They're buying office because it's on the nose, and they're repositioning it as medical, or they know they can turn it into some sort of neighborhood center with a really good community mix of tenants in there, and they do really well, because they can buy an asset that no one's really looking at. They get the rents up, and then away they go. They've got this equity in their properties, so it can be a really good asset.
Commercial versus real estate, commercial versus a resi house at 8 to 1 million price range. Is there commercial investments make sense for retail investors 2 to 3 million resi portfolios to go down commercial path for cash flow and divers? And Mick, you and I were speaking about diversities. I imagine that would be diversification. Mick, you and I were talking about this the other day, where there's that bit of a flight to commercial, and it's the residential investor is saying, well, okay, commercial looks a little bit sexy. It's a bright, shiny object. And that's sort of, are you sort of seeing some investors come in to your neck of the woods who are doing that? They're saying, I'm sick and tired of resi. It's now time to go across to commercial. Is that what you're sort of seeing? That's a different question to this one, but yeah. What do you reckon about this one, Mick? Sorry.
Look, most people seem to make the jump. We spoke about this the other day, but most people seem to make the jump because they've got, a decent portfolio, but they're just not getting the cash flow from it. So all their value is tied up in equity, which is nice, but you only get that money if you actually sell the assets. So I know Steve did a similar thing, with what he did. He sold some resi to reposition into commercial, and that cash flow is a much greater benefit to him now than it is, tied up in a property. So yeah, most people are making that jump. The general play seems to be buy a couple of resi and then sell 1 or 2 down, so you got your deposit to get into commercial, and that seems to be the biggest hurdle for most people, just to get the deposit together, really.
Yeah. What do you think, Steve, as somebody who sort of trodden a similar path yourself? I mean, I think you grew it to probably 7 or 8 million, whatever it was, or 6 million. Post speed trim, but what's your kind of, what's your line of thinking on that? Does it come down to the goals, or is that kind of the cliched response? Are you going to give us a cliche? What Steve?
Yeah, I'll give you the usual cliche response. what you're trying to achieve over what time frame versus what you got to work with, which I say on every single one. But like a lot of our clients, Mick was like into, like they sold a couple of resies. The other ones, we get a lot of like club 50 to 60, where they're looking at their super and stuff being like, oh, geez, I don't have much cash flow. Looking at their resi portfolio they've built in the last 5 years, being like, well, this thing's still negative. When's it going to start giving me an income? And then they make the shift there. So you're right. The only negative of commercial, because you get the same cash flow, or 3 times the cash flow, the exact same capital growth, more. Sydney Industrial outperformed resi in all of Australia. So you can still get more capital growth. You just don't get the leverage. So if you're starting out, leverage up to the eyeballs, get your 90%, get your 80%. Commercial, if you're typically 70% and below, you don't get the leverage. That's the only negative with commercial. And if you don't know what you're doing, you'll get burnt, which Mick sees all day, every day when he finds things wrong with the properties.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to get a little copy. This is information general. Do not go and necessarily leverage up to the air balls. Go and speak to your accountant and brokers. I mean, sometimes that's the information we give to people as well. But yeah.
I think one of the biggest silent killers of returns is vacancy, unnecessary vacancy. So as an agent, I would always come up against these owners, and they're lovely people, but they wouldn't, not always lovely, I should say, but yeah, most of them, they're really genuine people, but they feel like the best way to get the best return on their asset is to chase top of market rent, and be really picky about the type of tenant that they're going to get in their building. And what they don't realize that they're doing is that they're just killing the opportunity to get a deal done in the first month. You know, the amount of times that I could have cut deals on assets with a tenant at a great rate, but the owner had said to me, like, I don't like that type of tenant. I think it's going to be a bad tenant for my building. Like, and to the point, I remember one lady I had once who didn't want diamond bolts put into her warehouse floor because it was going to damage her property, but you need to bolt down racking. And so she sat on the market for like literally a year because she just kept knocking back tenants. And I didn't understand it, because like it only takes a few months of vacancy and you've just nuked your return for the year. Like, you're far better off cutting a deal, even if it's slightly under market. Like, some of the best and most successful owners that I've ever dealt with would intentionally just undercut the market when they had a vacancy. So if like the market rate's $200 a square, they'll go, I'll put it up for 180. And then you're guaranteed that any tenant in the area will be looking at your property. And then you just take your pick. And those guys would typically lease their assets, particularly industrial-wise, within a couple of weeks. So they've completely minimized their downtime. And that slight discount in rent that they've given has been completely negated, because you only need 1 extra month of vacancy and you've lost more, you know? So that's one of the biggest silent killers I've seen of return. Like, getting that filled quickly is the biggest way to have a great asset, you know? So
people do the same thing in residential as well. They'll say, okay, the market's telling me I can get 600. I think the property manager's telling me I can get 600, but the market's telling you get 570. And they're like, oh, I'm going to hold out for 4 weeks to get this 600 unicorn sort of tenant. And then they've lost more than what they would have gained, because you're talking $30 over a month. Is let's say 3 times 4, that's $120. So every week it's vacant is costing you that money. So yeah, you're exactly right. But Steve, you had something in light.
I think further mixed point is, if you've got fair rent or below market rent as well, they're not going to push as hard with the incentives. So you might actually save yourself 3 months free rent as well. So you kind of win on 2 fronts. Is there something, my sample side's quite small for this, but like anytime I've personally owned one that's went vacant, when I advertise, I always get like 2 or 3 applicants in the first month. And if the times I've said no to them, then it's real quiet for like 2 or 3 months, and you do exactly what you used to be like, shit, have I done something wrong here? Is that just when a new property comes on, you get more interest? Is that normally what happens? Or
can we just highlight that Steve said his sample size is small?
For vacant properties, for properties going vacant. Because I buy tenanted properties, so you have to wait years for them to actually go vacant.
Yeah, no, I would.
Yeah, look, there's an old saying which is true, that, you know, sometimes your first buyer is your best buyer, and that's the same with leasing. Like, sometimes your first offer for lease is your best offer, because people don't realize that tenant's been looking for 6 months and they haven't been able to find the asset, and they'll come in hot off the gate. And then I've had it heaps of times. The owner's like, oh, I don't know, should I really take this? I don't know. Yes, take this offer. I've been talking to them for 6 months. We're not going to get better, but because they've had no exposure. They haven't had that downtime of like, oh crap, getting to the point where I'm like, I'll take the next tenant. It can kind of hurt you. Yeah.
Maybe that's why, because there's more level of desperation. So when a new property does come on for lease, that's why they're onto it straight away. Whereas the ones that were like 4 months left on their lease or whatever probably don't have the same urgency yet.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's not hard. I should say it is hard to find an asset that will suit your business. So business owners aren't dumb. They know what they want and know what they need. And if the right thing comes up, they'll have a crack. And typically they're pretty well versed in what market rates are. So they'll make a reasonable offer if they're a decent human. But yeah, that's probably why you've seen, offers come in straight away and then a bit of a lull, because those 3 tenants were probably the main tenants in the area that was suitable for your property. So, it doesn't mean you always got to take that offer, but often they can be your best tenant to deal with. So, and if you can get them into your building, like the hardest part of leasing anything is actually getting them in your building. Once they're in your building, they will only move if they have to or if they go broke, because it's just so expensive to move. Like even if they get a slight discount on rent somewhere, it's still going to cost them an absolute bomb to move their business. Like it's not a fun process for anyone to go through. So getting them into your building is half the battle.
I asked a question about what were the mistakes that newcomers, what are the errors that they're making when they're getting into their commercial property investing journey? What are those due diligence things, or when they're cutting the deal, negotiating a lease, what should they be avoiding or doing instead of not avoiding?
So you're talking about once they own the asset, or when
or as they're getting into it and throughout the journey, what are those things that they sort of they miss out on doing, which they should be really doing?
What are the rookie mistakes that you find novice investors do for the commercial?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, on the buying side, just not understanding their outgoings. Really, that's the biggest thing that hurts any investor. But once they own the asset, look, one of my pet hates when I was an agent was that an owner would appoint 5 or 6 agents to go find the best result for their property, and then what they would effectively have is 5 or 6 different sets of information on the market. There would be an expectation from tenants on the market that there might be something wrong with that property because everyone's advertising it. And what they think they got the best chance of getting a deal done because they're listed with so many people, but actually what they effectively achieve is you'll end up getting 4 or 5 agents just quiet quitting on it. They'll throw an ad and do 0 work on the property, and then there might be 1 or 2 agents that are actually working with intent to try and get the deal done because they think you can get it done. I think a better way, and one of the best things an investor can do if they have a vacancy coming up, is actually get on Real Commercial and just find out who's the leading agent in the area. Like there'll be someone that has probably 60 or 70% market share in most areas. And engage those guys. They'll typically be more expensive, but get them to advertise your property because they're almost guaranteed to be dealing with every tenant in the market. And then if you can do those couple of things we touched on, is like maybe just advertise your property a little bit cheaper. You can bet your bottom dollar that any tenant they got looking is going to see your property, and if you've exclusively appointed them to do the job, they'll typically get it done much faster. I'll never forget, we did a study on a review, I should say, on everything that we leased over the course of a year, and it was a few hundred leases, like big and small, and the properties that were openly listed took twice as long to lease. And the only thing we could put it down to was the fact that the properties that were exclusively on the books with us, and we were the only ones working on it, we just naturally felt the pressure to get them done. And we got them done. So any tenant that was looking, we were just throwing them at this property, and naturally you just end up getting deals done faster, which is a great result for the owner. So I think it's one of the best things you can do is like not multi-list it. Just make sure you get the best agent in the area running your property and price it appropriately, and don't be too picky on the tenant, and you'll be fine. It'll work out.